My name is Marissa Hukin. I'm here with Red Liberty Media at the Young Women's Leadership Summit. We have a special guest today, Morgan Zegers, who actually founded a nonprofit, Young Americans Against Socialism, and is a TPUSA influencer as well, and you do a lot of things. So thank you for being with us today.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm super excited, and I love what you guys are up to.
Yes, well, we're so excited to speak with you today. And in terms of these projects that you have, obviously there's an emphasis on fighting against socialism and communism, which is very needed. But I'm really curious because you did grow up in upstate New York, which is amazing. How did you actually get into that? Like, what inspired that?
Yeah, I would say for me, so I've loved history ever since I was young. My father's a colonel in the military. He served in Operation Iraqi Freedom. He was there on site at 9/11, especially on 9/12 during the cleanup.
Yeah.
And because of that, because of the values that my parents gave to me, I've just appreciated history so much. And that being said, history nerd Morgan went to college and had a roommate that was a communist with a poster of Mao Zedong, Lenin, Stalin, Karl Marx, and Fidel Castro on the wall. And I remember looking at it and I'm hearing her talking points of progress and the working class is going to rise up and we're going to empower everybody and there's going to be progress for all, justice for all. And I'm thinking, but the people on your poster are mass murderers and dictators. And my knowledge of the situation really only went that far. And I looked into it so much and I realized that there's so much missing from the public school classrooms.
Right.
And I got inspired to learn for myself and then to also share that information with my peers. And I found out the best way to do that is by interviewing survivors from those countries. So we're in Dallas right now for this conference, but I actually also filmed the communism interviews in Dallas at the studio for Mercury One, Glenn Beck. The vault that they have created full of artifacts. And so we're interviewing these amazing historical stories surrounded by world history and American history artifacts, even copies of Mao's Little Red Book. It's fascinating, and I'm really hoping that in the past, I used to do social media videos, but now these are 1 hour long interviews. It's called The Freedom Records, the show. And we're hoping that they get played in homeschool sessions, charter schools, private schools, and maybe some public school classrooms. So we're excited.
Yes, that is so needed. And actually, I come from a family of educators. My dad's a history teacher.
Oh.
So this sounds like some content that is really needed as far as just adding that into the curriculum. So it's amazing that you are really just starting that. So I love that, and we'll be looking for that. In terms of socialism, too, obviously that is becoming commonplace, right, in terms of a conversation, all these people espousing these values now, which is shocking too. Do you have any advice in terms of when you're having those debates for like maybe a key point or argument that somebody could make with somebody who is really leaning towards that today?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many basic talking points that are just flawed coming from the left that are easy to debunk, whether that's them saying that via democratic socialism that's being proposed these days, it's going to be a softer version, it's not going to end up like Venezuela or the past, we're going to look like Nordic Europe. The basic thing there is that those are capitalist, private economy countries. The one really good example, I don't know if you saw this, but recently this week it was discovered that the Biden administration is threatening funding for school lunch programs for public schools unless the schools comply with allowing boys and girls bathrooms and other gender accepting policies.
Right.
It's very woke policy that they're discussing, and that deserves its own separate discussion. But the important thing about socialism is that lesson of it's dangerous to have somebody control such an important aspect of your life.
Sure.
So when you give government control of things like the economy, like healthcare, like providing your groceries, like providing your employment, your retirement, all of those things are then held over your head like a carrot unless you comply.
Yes.
And so they say you won't get XYZ until you comply with our new demands.
Sure.
It's about control. Yes, the economy fails, but then the government controls you. And so this little smaller example of them holding over our heads the food for our children in schools really, first of all, explains the danger of what happens when you have federal funding and the state is dependent on the federal government for funding schools.
Yeah.
We need to make sure that the states are more financially independent, but it most importantly represents how dangerous it is for government to be able to force you to comply to something by taking away something that they provide so crucially. crucially. So it's a great lesson in independence, in self-reliance, and especially dependence or independence away from the government.
Yes, absolutely. It's really scary that we've gotten to this point, of course, and I know you've talked about this before, is just the importance of family. And that's kind of what that goes back to, right? Is it's like kind of putting the state, really putting the state above family and trying to just tear that apart. So I know you're also passionate about the family and homesteading and all of these kind of traditional values, which is so refreshing in today's day and age and just really intriguing as well. What would you say is your favorite activity for like the whole homesteading?
Oh my goodness. Well, I love baking and cooking from scratch. I think it's really important for us. We have trusted the FDA, the government in general, and public schools for way too long. And so looking at the ingredients, looking at the science of a lot of this stuff, whether it's from birth control to the chemicals, the active chemicals in sunscreen that are approved by the FDA. Oxybenzone is a carcinogen, and we're putting it on our bodies with sunscreen every single day. And so learning these things is horrifying, especially with food. And so I have a passion for cooking from scratch. The other thing, I love riding horses. I love learning skills of growing my own food. Victory gardens during World War II provided about 40% of America's food supply when families were growing their own food in their own gardens, because our resources as a nation needed to be sent over to our troops that were fighting against the Nazi regime. And so learning this kind of stuff is just fascinating to me. It's inspiring. And to be able to connect an independent lifestyle for me and my family and my personal passions for that with the advocacy of independence as a nation, as individual families in that nation, in that society, it correlates right into these interviews with survivors of communism. We can close on this. I just want to add one little thing. I know we're going long, but in one of the interviews, we talked with someone who lived through the Cultural Revolution in China, and she explained that the government often tries to make it so that the government is the parent, and they want to deconstruct the American family unit in America today, but they did it in the past. And the phrasing back then was that Mao, the Chairman Mao, the dictator, was the father, and everybody in the regime were his little children. And so hearing these stories and then seeing that Black Lives Matter today wants to deconstruct the American nuclear family unit, my biggest lesson in this is it's important to focus on yourself as a strong individual, and then your strong family unit, being strong for your family and your children, and then being strong at the community level. And I can't think of a better way to do that than to take ownership and empowerment of your own life away from the government.
Totally. I am with you, and that is some powerful wisdom from Morgan Zegers. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much. You guys are awesome. Thank you.
So good.